Recently, the Supreme Court was formally asked to overturn Obergefell versus Hodges, the Supreme Court ruling that allowed gay marriage and equal rights for gay couples. With this, there's been a lot of fear-mongering and discussion going around about whether or not this could happen, whether or not it should happen. In reality, the odds of this ruling getting overturned are extremely low. But the question is, should we ban gay marriage? The immediate, obvious answer to this question is that gay people should have all the same rights and liberties as straight people. This isn't a groundbreaking take, and regardless of what anybody says, the vast majority of Americans agree with it. But behind this obvious answer lies a different question with a much more complicated answer. Should we do away with all marriages? I'm 22 years old. I've been happily married for over a year, and I was very lucky to find a woman who I get to spend the rest of my life with, who is as great as my wife is. So why would I be saying that we should get rid of marriage? Well, to answer that question, there's one final question we need to answer. What is marriage? The first recorded evidence of marriage was in around 2350 BC in Mesopotamia. In early Greece and Rome and other ancient civilizations, the main purpose of these marriages were to bind a man and a woman so that the man could ensure that the kids were his, and to make passing on wealth and property and things like that simpler through the generations. These marriages were very different than the ones we have today, with women becoming property and men being allowed to satisfy their urges outside of their marriage with other women if they felt the need to. These marriages were more about controlling women than they were about binding together two people who love each other. As Christianity gained popularity, marriage ceremonies started to become more religious, with many of Christ's teachings having to do with marriage and how spouses need to treat each other. This Christian influence would make the idea of marriage lean more heavily into the idea that two people are making a promise to each other to, love each other and support each other forever, rather than just making sure the kids are legitimate. Here's a slight tangent about something that I find interesting. Many people like to use Christian marriages as sort of this pinnacle of the patriarchy and that sort of thing. But many of Christ's teachings were actually more about how a man needs to treat his woman well, rather than, how women need to be more subservient. A lot of these verses get taken out of context and they get used to further sort of demonize and push the narrative that like Christianity's bad or whatever. But here's an example of this that I'd like to read. 1 Corinthians 7:3-4, which reads, quote, "The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but yields it to her husband. In the same way, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but yields it to his wife." The idea of a woman yielding her body to her husband was already the main purpose of marriage. And so that's, sounds bad when you just take that piece out of context. But for it to be followed up with a man also yields his body to his wife is that's kind of how it should be, right? In a marriage, you should agree on everything. Either way. Back to the actual topic at hand, and we're done with this tangent. Marriage is also very important in other religions and ideologies, but I am unfamiliar with those ideologies, and they don't largely pertain to marriage in America, so I don't feel the need to discuss them here today. In early America, marriage had those Christian influences. It still served the purpose of binding a man and a woman together to make sure the children were legitimate, and made it easier to pass down wealth and property throughout the generations, but the rules were a lot more strict for what the men were allowed to do in that relationship. The significance of marriage can't be discussed without talking about divorce. Initially in the American colonies, divorces were granted for reasons of adultery, desertion, bigamy, when you get married to someone when you're already married, and things of that nature. Impotence would be grounds for divorce sometimes. These restrictions would loosen after 1776, but the cases would still have to be heard in front of a court. This process would get easier in the 1950s with the family court system, making it so that these divorce hearings didn't have to be tried the same way they used to be, but there still needed to be a reason for the divorce or an at-fault party, you know, for reasons of adultery, bigamy, etc. No-fault divorce laws were introduced in the 1970s that did away with that reason for divorce that you would need, making it so that you can basically just get a divorce if you want one. Nobody had to do anything that the court would deem a good enough reason for divorce. In the modern age, you can go to Nevada and get married on a whim and then get divorced almost just as easily. So what really is marriage? Marriage for me was about making a promise to my wife with God as my witness that I would love her and be loyal to her for the rest of my life. And the certificate we bought really had nothing to do with that. The only reasons we did it was because it was the cheapest way to get a name change. It's what you're supposed to do, and it makes things like insurance and stuff a lot easier. In 2025, you don't need to be married to know whether or not a child is yours, and social norms around having illegitimate children or adultery or premarital sex have changed significantly, where a lot of that stuff is widely acceptable. You don't need to be married to pass along your belongings generationally, and if you aren't religious, meaning you aren't making a promise to God, then you making a promise to your spouse is really only as good as your word is, right? Which that can be worth something, but a lot of times it isn't. A lot of people are liars. And there's no institution to stop you from breaking that promise and divorcing just on a whim. If you were anti-gay marriage, you could say something to the effect of, in the traditional sense, there's no reason for gay marriage. Gay people can't produce offspring, so there's no reason to ensure that the children are theirs, and there will be nothing to pass through the generations. And if you look at it from the religious angle, gay people aren't Christian, so their promise is only as good as their word is, because God isn't there to make sure that, you know, keep them accountable. But the truth is, the only reason for anybody to get married through the state is for insurance and medical purposes. This is largely a reason why gay people wanted to be able to get married, was for things like insurance and medical purposes. And any other reason you would have to get married doesn't need the state's involvement. Do I think we should do away with all marriage? Yeah, kinda. I think we should replace or rename it with a similar system that binds two people together for the purposes of taxes and insurance and medical things, but also leaves marriage as a social construct for people who want their relationship to have more weight than what a modern marriage does. If you could just go buy a certificate of a civil union, then the religious people could have the religious ceremonies that they want, and the non-religious people could have the non-religious ceremonies that they want. You could call it whatever you wanted. Everybody would be treated equally. And the only people who would care are people who don't understand that the government shouldn't have any involvement in your commitment to another person. But I guess that means that maybe too many people would be upset for that to ever work. Anyway, I hope you guys liked this video. It's a little different than the videos I've been making, but it's just something that's been being talked about in the news that I thought would be interesting to get my opinion out there on. Because, you know, I do think that it's kind of weird the way marriage has been treated within the modern age. You know, I'm, like I said earlier, or maybe I didn't say it earlier, I'm only 22, so, you know, I haven't really been around for any of that shit, but it just is interesting the way a lot of people put this weight on marriage in their own mind, but marriage really only means something if it means something to you. And most people just don't really respect the sanctity of marriage or their promise to their spouse, with divorce rates so high and things like that. It's just, to me, it seems kind of ridiculous that there are all these like social stigmas about marriage and divorce and all this stuff. And like, I think most people only get married because they should, or because they want to put, the person they live with on their insurance. And I think that there should just be another way for that to happen without it being controversial. You know what I mean? And call it whatever you want, do whatever you want. I would still say I was married because the certificate was the least important part. But anyway, that's it for this one. If you liked the video, like and subscribe, drop a comment. Let me know what you think. I've got another similar video to this coming out next week, hopefully. And then all I've got left on the roster is, some pop culture stuff, some video game movies, TV shows, stuff like that. I'm not sure if I plan on making one of these pseudo-political videos for a little while. I'm definitely going to, but after this next one, I don't know how long it's going to be before another one comes out. But either way, it doesn't matter. If you like the video, let me know what your opinion is. And, yeah, I'll see you next time. Or I won't. But either way, thanks for watching. Peace.